I will never forget the sound of the door hitting my back. It was a dry, brutal slam, as if my entire life was being shut out of the house I had built myself. I fell to the ground, onto the cold pavement, while my son-in-law, his eyes full of hatred, screamed at me. "You're going to die on the street, you disgusting old man. Don't you ever set foot here again." My daughter stood behind him, trembling, not from fear, but from shame. Shame of me. When I tried to speak, when I tried to tell them I had only come back for my medicine, he cut me off with a voice I'll never forget. "Did you hear my husband, Dad? Leave. We don't want you here." And then he, that man who once called me his dear father-in-law, took my photos, my shirts, the memories of my late wife, and threw them on the ground. With a cruel smile, he stomped on them one by one. "That's to remind you who's in charge here," he said, before kicking me so hard it knocked the wind out of me. The physical pain was nothing compared to the other kind, the kind that digs deep inside your chest. I stayed on the ground, staring at the pieces of my life scattered on the sidewalk, not understanding how I had reached this point. I had given them everything, and yet there I was, thrown out like an old rag, while my daughter closed the curtains so she wouldn't have to see me anymore. I barely managed to get to my feet, my knees trembling, holding a suitcase that felt weightless because it had almost nothing inside. I walked away without looking back. Night was falling, and the rain began to fall too, as if the sky itself wanted to join me in my misery. But before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I create from the heart. Now, let's continue. I walked until my body gave out. The city looked enormous, crueler than ever. No one looked at the old man dragging his feet, soaked, his dignity shattered. I thought about taking shelter at the station, but the guard kicked me out. I ended up on a park bench, under a streetlight that flickered as if it too were tired of living. There, with the distant noise of cars and the smell of wet earth, my mind began to fill with memories. I saw my wife Linda's face, smiling at me like she did when we first moved into that house. I remembered how we painted the walls together, how we planted a tree in the backyard the same day our daughter was born. That tree must be over 30 years old now. And me, I was its old, crooked shadow. I couldn't understand it. My daughter, my only daughter, the same one I carried on my shoulders as she learned to walk, the one who would get sick and make me sleep by her bed, the same one I worked myself sick for to pay for her college. When did she turn into someone capable of throwing me out without an ounce of mercy? The answer hurt to admit. The moment she met her husband, that arrogant man who came into my life with fake smiles and empty promises. At first, he seemed nice, a proper, hard-working young man. But soon, I began to notice his condescending tone, his gestures of superiority, the way he looked at her as if she were his trophy. I put up with it for my daughter's sake, because I thought he would mature with time. But I was wrong. What matured was his cruelty. That night, the cold seeped into my bones. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. I could only think of one phrase that repeated in my mind. They took everything from you, but they can't take who you are. And although I felt defeated in that moment, a small spark began to burn inside me. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper. It was a promise. I promised I wouldn't die there, on the street. I promised that one day, somehow, they would understand what they had done. I wasn't seeking revenge, at least not yet. I was seeking something that would hurt more, their reflection, that one day they would look in the mirror and feel shame, that they would understand that the old man they threw out was the same one who gave them a roof, food, and a name. Dawn found me awake, my clothes damp and my body aching. A child passing by with his mother looked at me with pity. She quickly pulled him away, as if I were a dangerous shadow, and it was in that moment, as I watched them walk away, that I made my decision. I wasn't going to stay like this. I wouldn't be another old man abandoned by his family. I would get up, even if it was the last thing I did. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I took the first step. And even though the cold wind whipped my face, something inside me ignited. I knew that one day I would return to that house, not as the defeated man who left that night, but as someone who returns to teach the greatest lesson of all, that betrayed love turns into strength, and dignity, when reborn, does not forgive being forgotten. Sleeping on the street isn't just about the cold or hunger. It's a silent battle with your mind. The nights are endless. The hours stretch as if time itself wants to torture you. You hear footsteps, cars, murmurs. Everything seems distant, as if the world keeps spinning while you remain suspended in a forgotten corner. That first week was hell. I learned that loneliness has a sound, the wind whistling through the trees, the drops hitting the roof of a bus stop, the echo of a voice that is no longer there. I spent my days on the same park bench, near a fountain where children tossed coins and made wishes. I watched them and thought that, once, I was one of them, believing that all it took was closing your eyes and dreaming for everything to come true. Now, I understood that life doesn't grant wishes, it collects them with interest. Hunger became my worst enemy. It wasn't just physical, it was a feeling of total emptiness. I ate what I could, leftover bread, a cold coffee that a stranger sometimes left on the bench. The body gets used to surviving, but the soul doesn't. Every time the sun went down, the image of my house came to mind, of my chair by the window, of my daughter serving me tea on winter afternoons. And although that image hurt me, it was the only thing that kept my heart beating. One particularly cold night, when the wind seemed to cut through my bones, I found myself talking to myself. I was talking to Linda, my wife. "If you could see me, my love," I whispered, "if you could see me now sitting on this bench like a beggar." I imagined her voice answering me sweetly. "Get up, Michael. Don't give them the power to see you fall." I closed my eyes and I could smell her, feel her presence, as if she were sitting next to me. That feeling, for a moment, gave me back the strength I had lost. But before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me see you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now let's continue. The following days were a parade of indifferent faces. I learned to recognize the look of someone who sees you but pretends not to. In society, homeless old men are ghosts. We exist, but no one wants to remember it. However, one afternoon, something changed. I was picking up leftovers behind a coffee shop when I heard a voice behind me. "Michael, is that you?" I turned around and saw a tall man with gray hair and an elegant suit. It took me a few seconds to recognize him. It was Daniel, an old friend from my youth, with whom I had worked in construction more than 30 years ago. His expression froze when he saw me. "My God, what happened to you?" he asked, with a mix of astonishment and sadness. I didn't know what to say. I lowered my head, ashamed. "Life, Daniel. Life ran me over." He took my arm without another word and led me to his car. I didn't have the strength to resist. During the ride, he didn't speak, and neither did I. But I could feel his gaze on me from the corner of my eye, a look that mixed pity with respect, as if he were trying to understand how a man who was once strong and dignified had ended up on the street. When we arrived at his house, he sat me at a table and served me a hot plate of food. I don't remember the last time I had real food. As I ate, my hands trembled so much I had to hold the fork with both of them. "You don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to," he said. "But I want you to know I'm not going to leave you like this." I looked into his eyes. In them, I saw something I thought was lost. Humanity. That night I slept in a clean bed, with warm sheets and the kind silence of a home. I didn't sleep deeply. The body rests, but the mind stays alert. Still, I was grateful for every second of that truce. The next morning, Daniel took me for a walk in the garden. He told me about his life, how he had become a lawyer, about his deceased wife, about his children who lived far away. At one point he stopped and said, "Don't ask me why, but I feel like fate brought you to me for a reason." I looked at him, not fully understanding. "What reason could there be, Daniel?" "Maybe to give you a second chance," he replied with a slight smile. "And also to settle scores with the past." That phrase echoed in my head for the rest of the day. A second chance? At my age? After so much pain? But something inside me, a tiny spark, ignited again. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe life still had one more page written for me. That night, before sleeping, I asked God that if he let me get back up, it wouldn't be to destroy, but to do justice. Not to get revenge, but to reclaim my name, my dignity, my place in the world. And with that thought, I fell asleep, my heart serene for the first time in a long time. I woke up early that morning. For the first time in weeks, my body didn't feel numb, nor did I feel the weight of hunger pressing on my chest. The sun streamed through the window and rested on my hands, the same chapped hands that once built a house brick by brick, and that now rested on a clean blanket. I stared at them for a long time. I thought about everything they had done, how they had raised a family, a home, a future, and how, in a single moment, they had lost it all. Daniel entered the room quietly with a steaming cup of coffee. "Good morning, old friend," he said in his deep but kind voice. You look better today. I took the cup carefully. I don't know about better, but at least different. He smiled and sat across from me. Different is a good start. We sat in silence for a while, looking out the window. Outside, the garden was filled with light, and the singing of birds seemed almost a miracle. After so much time among the filth, the rain, and contempt, that simple sunrise tasted like redemption. When I finished my coffee, Daniel looked at me with a new seriousness. Michael, I need you to tell me everything, without holding back. What happened to you? How did you end up on the street? I hesitated for a moment. It was hard to put the humiliation into words. But his gaze wasn't one of judgment, but of understanding. And so, in a low voice, I told him everything, from the day my son-in-law first walked through my door, to the night he threw me out like a dog. As I spoke, I felt the wounds opening up again. I told him the details, the tone of his voice, the photos being torn, the final slam of the door. Daniel didn't interrupt me. He just listened, his brow furrowed and his eyes filled with indignation. When I finished, I fell silent, exhausted. He stood up and walked a few steps. Then he turned to me. Michael, do you know that legally that house is still yours? I looked at him confused. What are you saying? I checked some records this morning. I remembered you told me years ago that you bought it before your daughter's marriage, and although you made a verbal agreement, they never registered a transfer of deed. In the eyes of the law, it's still in your name. I felt the air stop. You mean that? I mean, he interrupted, that bastard not only humiliated you, but he's living under a roof that belongs to you. I didn't know what to say. I sat still, staring into space. Something ignited inside me that I couldn't describe. It wasn't joy, nor was it vengeance. It was as if a dormant part of my soul had awakened. Daniel, I said in a low voice, I don't want to become a bitter man, but I don't want to die with this weight on me either. He came closer and put a hand on my shoulder. Then don't die, Michael. Stand up, get justice, not for pride, but for dignity. His words struck me like thunder. I thought about it all day. While he made calls and reviewed papers, I watched him in silence, moving with a cold and elegant precision. His office was full of law books, diplomas, old photographs. He seemed like a man who had won all his battles. And yet, his face had something I understood well, the sadness of someone who had also lost something they loved. When he returned to the living room, he handed me an envelope. Here is everything we need to start, he said, but before we act, I want you to be sure. This isn't a simple procedure, it's the beginning of something bigger. I opened it carefully. Inside were copies of deeds, legal documents, and a letter signed by a notary. Everything is perfectly in order. How did you do it so quickly? I asked, surprised. Let's just say the years taught me how to move without making a sound, he replied with a half smile. But before we continue, there's something I need to know. Do you want to do this for justice or for revenge? I looked at him intently. It took me a few seconds to answer. For justice, I finally said, because I want my daughter to understand what she did. I want her to see the price of her silence. Daniel nodded slowly. Then we'll do it your way. No shouting, no violence, no resentment. We will bring them down with the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced back and forth in the room, the envelope in my hand. I looked at the documents over and over, trying to understand how fate, which had crushed me without mercy, was now extending a hand to me. I thought of my wife. If she were alive, she would have smiled seeing this. Not for the money or the house, but because she always believed that justice, sooner or later, comes to those who act with a clean heart. Before going to bed, I opened the window. Outside, the sky was covered with stars, and for the first time in months, I felt I wasn't alone. The wind brought me a phrase I thought I heard in my mind. They're not giving you back what you lost, Michael. They're giving you back the chance to be who you were. I closed my eyes and smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, fate was giving me something more valuable than a house. It was giving me the right to look at the world again without lowering my head. Feeling alive again was harder than I imagined. The body gets used to pain, but the soul takes longer to heal. The first few days after talking to Daniel, I spent in silence, as if every word he had said needed to settle inside me. The idea of getting back what was mine, of returning to that house not as a beggar, but as its rightful owner, gave me strength, but also fear. Fear of facing my daughter again, fear of looking into the eyes of the one who had forgotten me without trembling. Daniel helped me with everything. He took me to a doctor. He got me exams and treatment. I discovered that, despite everything, my heart was still strong. It's worn out, but it's strong, the doctor said. That sentence seemed like a perfect metaphor for my life. He also got me new clothes and a temporary job at one of his construction companies. The first time I held a tool after so many years, my hands trembled, not from weakness, but from emotion. It was like rediscovering a part of me I thought I had lost. During the workday, I would watch the young men working alongside me. They complained about the heat, the fatigue, the long shifts, and I would watch them in silence, thinking about everything I would give to be 20 years younger and have the chance to start over. I didn't judge them. I just saw myself reflected in them, remembering the man I once was. Strong, determined, a dreamer. Every day, when the workday ended, I would return to the small room Daniel had prepared for me. It was simple, but it had the most important thing: peace. I would turn on an old lamp, pour myself a cup of tea, and write in a notebook. There, I began to capture my thoughts, my memories, and slowly, my plans. Not for revenge, but for life. One night, as I was writing, Daniel came in without knocking. "Still awake, huh?" he said in his half-serious, half-paternal tone. "Yes, I have trouble sleeping. I guess when you start to feel hope again, sleep slips away." He laughed and sat across from me. "I've been thinking, Michael. We have everything ready to act legally, but I want you to be prepared. This is going to stir things up. Your daughter is going to cry, she's going to scream. And your son-in-law, well, your son-in-law is going to go down like a cornered wolf." I looked at him in silence, with a mix of calm and determination. "Daniel, I'm not trying to destroy them. I just want them to understand what they did. That life isn't built by humiliating the one who loved you." He nodded, as if he understood more than I was saying. "Then we'll do this with elegance. There will be no shouting or scandals. Only truth." I thought about that word, truth. So many times I had kept quiet for love. So many times I had preferred silence to avoid conflict. But I understood that being silent is also a way of dying. Sometimes you have to speak, even if it hurts, even if your voice trembles. That night I dreamed of Linda. We were in the garden of the house, the same one she cared for with so much love. Her hands were full of dirt, and when she saw me, she smiled. "You've returned to your roots," she said. "The earth does not forget the one who sowed it." I woke up with tears in my eyes, but also with a peace I hadn't felt in years. It was as if she were telling me that the path I was taking was the right one. The weeks passed, and my body began to respond better. I walked more upright, breathed without pain, and even my face changed. One day I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The defeated man was gone. In his place, there was someone with fire in his eyes and temperance in his voice. But before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories, and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me see you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue. One afternoon, while we were having coffee, Daniel said to me, "I've been looking into something else. Your son-in-law, besides taking your house, has been using your assets as collateral for loans he can't repay. If we wanted to, we could leave him in ruins." I looked at him and felt a pang in my chest. Not of guilt, but of compassion. "No, Daniel, I don't want to see him ruined. I want to see him face himself. I want him to look in the mirror and see what he really is. Money can be recovered, but shame, that will mark him for life." Daniel watched me in silence, nodding slowly. "You are more noble than I thought, Michael. No, my friend, I just learned that hate destroys the one who carries it more than the one who receives it." From that day on, everything began to change. Daniel quietly pulled his strings. He spoke with a judge, prepared documents, reopened records, and while he took care of the legal world, I took care of the emotional one, strengthening my spirit, preparing myself to look at my daughter without hatred. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I saw an old woman feeding pigeons. I sat next to her, and she smiled at me. "You have the look of someone who is starting over," she said. "Perhaps," I replied. "Sometimes life uproots us only to plant us better." She nodded as if she had been waiting to hear that her whole life. When I returned home that night, I found Daniel in the dining room with a folder open on the table. He looked at me with an expression that mixed satisfaction and respect. "It's all ready, Michael. All it needs is your signature." I took a deep breath and picked up the pen. I held it steady, feeling the weight of the years, the weight of my story. And as I signed, I knew something inside me was closing. The humiliated old man died right there, in that ink. In his place, the man who had found his voice again was born. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise or fury. Sometimes it arrives in silence, disguised as patience, walking slowly but surely. Daniel used to tell me that every time I got desperate to see results. "Time is a wiser judge than we are, Michael," he would repeat. "We just have to give it the right evidence." And that's what we did. We gave time what it needed to play in our favor. Every day, Daniel explained a little more about what we were building. It wasn't a simple legal case. It was a perfectly woven network of documents, statements, and calculated silences. We weren't going to storm into their house or confront them head on. No, we were going to knock on the door of their conscience in the courts. During those weeks, I became his shadow. I accompanied him to the office, watched how he drafted documents, how he spoke with a calmness that commanded respect. In every move, there was an invisible strategy. I didn't understand much about laws, but I did understand construction, and that, in a way, was the same thing. Building something solid, brick by brick, until no lie could tear it down. One morning, Daniel handed me an envelope with several papers. "Here are the copies of the deeds to your house, certified by the notary. No transfer was ever registered. Not to your daughter, nor your son-in-law. You are still the absolute owner." I took the envelope with trembling hands, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. "So," I said slowly, "everything they did, all their arrogance, all their contempt, was on land that still belongs to me." Daniel nodded with a barely perceptible smile. "That's right. They thought they owned the world, and they don't even know they're living under your roof." That sentence struck me like lightning. I imagined their house, their laughter, their dinners with friends, all of it built on a mistake they were about to pay for dearly. But before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories, and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me see you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue. Daniel began to gather evidence of how my son-in-law had used my assets as collateral for illegal loans. He did it all without thinking, with the arrogance of someone who believes impunity is eternal. "He messed with the wrong person," Daniel said while reviewing a document. "Sometimes justice comes in the form of an old man, but it comes all the same." I listened to him in silence, remembering every word, every insult, every gesture of contempt, not from hatred but from a clear, conscious memory. It was important not to let resentment consume me. I wanted my victory to be calm, elegant, without the stain of bitterness. One afternoon, Daniel took me to a discreet restaurant downtown. A notary and a young man who turned out to be a journalist were waiting for us there. "Michael, this is Mark," Daniel said. "He will be in charge of investigating your son-in-law's financial movements. All with discretion." The young man shook my hand firmly. "I promise you, your story will not remain in silence," he said. "Sometimes heroes don't wear capes, they wear scars." That sentence moved me more than I imagined. I thanked him with a handshake and understood that I was no longer alone. There was an invisible network of people who wanted to help me, not out of pity, but out of respect. The following days were a mix of calm and tension. I knew something big was brewing, but I also knew I had to remain serene. I spent the afternoons walking in the park or sitting by the sea. Sometimes I carried a notebook with me and wrote down loose thoughts. About forgiveness, about time, about dignity. I remember one sunset in particular. I was sitting watching the waves when a child approached me to sell flowers. "Who are they for?" he asked innocently. I looked at him and smiled. "For someone who is no longer here, but who taught me everything I know about love." The boy nodded, not fully understanding, and went on his way. I looked at the flowers in my hands. They were small, humble, but beautiful. In that moment, I knew that even though my life had been filled with wounds, there was still beauty in it. As the days passed, Daniel updated me with every development. "Your son-in-law is in trouble, Michael. Very soon, a court inspector will go to his house to notify him of the title review. He doesn't suspect anything yet, but his name is starting to appear in the records." "And my daughter?" I asked with a thin voice. "She has no idea. She lives in a bubble, believing her husband controls everything. When he falls, the whole lie will fall." That night, I didn't sleep. I walked down the hallway of Daniel's house, my heart in a whirlwind of emotions. I didn't want her to suffer, but I also knew that sometimes pain is the only way to wake up. At dawn, I poured myself a coffee and went out to the garden. The cool air caressed my face. I thought of Linda, as always. "Are you seeing this, my love?" I whispered. "I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking justice. For us, for everything we built." And the light wind seemed to answer me. I didn't know if I was ready to see it again. Not my daughter, but it. The house, my house, the one I built with my hands and with the sweat of my brow. The walls I raised brick by brick, every inch designed to protect those I loved. Months had passed since that day they threw me onto the street, but in my mind, the echo of the slamming door was still alive. Daniel told me it was important to see it again, not as a victim, but as a man. To close a chapter, he said, you first have to face it. So I went. Not with anger, but with calm, in a borrowed suit, my hair combed back, and a folder in my hand that made me look like a serious client. I presented myself as a buyer interested in properties in the area. Daniel arranged the visit, pretending to be my advisor. Neither of us mentioned our real names. When the car stopped in front of the gate, I felt a knot in my stomach. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. The facade was painted a different color. Linda's flower pots were gone, and the old rose bush we planted together on our 20th anniversary had disappeared. In its place was an artificial garden, perfect, but soulless. Daniel looked at me and gave a slight nod, as if asking me to be brave. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. It took a few seconds for them to open. When the door moved, he appeared. My son-in-law, the same arrogant face, the same fake smile. His gaze fell on me with feigned courtesy. He didn't recognize me. "Good morning," he said, adjusting the expensive watch on his wrist. "How can I help you?" "Good morning," I replied, holding back the tremor in my voice. "We are interested in seeing the house. We were told it's on the luxury property market." He smiled, pleased with himself. "Ah, yes. Well, I haven't officially listed it yet, but I'm always open to offers. Please, come in." I entered, and there it was. The air hit me like a living memory. I recognized every corner, every line of the ceiling, but nothing had the soul it once had. The paintings Linda made were gone. In their place hung framed photographs of trips and dinners with people I didn't know. The sofa where my granddaughter used to sleep was now white, spotless, as if no one ever used it. And the smell, that warm smell of home, of fresh coffee and flowers, had been replaced by expensive perfume and emptiness. I walked slowly, letting my eyes take in the details. Every step was a blow to my heart. I touched the railing of the staircase, and could still feel the tiny mark where my daughter, as a child, had carved her initials with a kitchen knife. I leaned over a bit to see if they were still there. They weren't. They had sanded it down, erased it, as if they wanted to remove any trace of who we were. My son-in-law talked nonstop, boasting about the renovations. We knocked down the old back wall, installed Italian marble in the kitchen. Everything's new. The house is on another level now. I nodded, feigning interest, while inside everything was breaking. "It must have been expensive," I said. "Oh, quite," he replied with an air of superiority. "But money isn't a problem when you know how to manage it." Daniel watched him calmly, studying him. He knew that every arrogant word he spoke would be his downfall when the time came. But before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories, and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me see you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now let's continue. We continued the tour. We reached the backyard. Linda's tree was still there. It had grown, strong, with branches that reached for the sky. They had surrounded it with decorative lights, but its trunk was still the same. I touched the rough bark and felt a shiver. It was as if it were speaking to me. She's still here, I thought. My son-in-law watched me without suspecting who I really was. "Are you interested in the garden?" he asked. "Very much," I replied, hiding my emotion. "Old trees have a history that money can't buy." He laughed. "Well, some of us prefer to leave old things behind. The important thing is to move forward." I looked at him, just for a moment, and in that moment, I understood that he was already defeated without knowing it, because those who forget their roots, sooner or later, fall. As we were returning to the car, my daughter appeared at the entrance. My heart stopped. She hadn't changed much, but her gaze had. She had the expression of someone living between luxury and sadness. She didn't recognize me at first. "Interested in buying?" she asked. "That's right," Daniel replied politely. "Your husband showed us the house. It's impressive." She smiled coldly. "Yes, he's worked very hard to achieve all this." That sentence was like a dagger. "He has worked very hard," I was about to answer to tell her the truth right there. But I held back. It wasn't the time. Revenge is not served with shouts, but with silence. We said a polite goodbye and got back in the car. During the drive, neither of us spoke. Only when the engine stopped in front of the office did Daniel break the silence. "Are you okay?" "No," I answered honestly. "But now, I know exactly why I'm doing this." That night, in my room, I lit a candle in front of Linda's photo. "They've changed everything, my love," I whispered. "But they couldn't erase the most important thing, who we were. And soon they will understand that the house wasn't just walls. It was memory. It was respect." And with that promise, I blew out the candle. That night, I didn't sleep. The visit to the house had stirred up more inside me than I had imagined. Seeing those empty walls, the walls that once held my laughter and my wife's, turned into a cold and alien stage, was like walking on the remains of my own life. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake up. The sky was a pale gray, holding no promises, but I knew something was about to change. I felt that time, finally, was leaning in my favor. Daniel arrived early, as always, impeccable in his dark suit. He carried a thick folder under his arm and a serious expression. "It all begins today, Michael," he told me bluntly. "We have everything we need." "Are you sure?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. "More than ever," he said as he opened the folder on the table. "Look, inside were the original deeds, the notary certifications, and the bank documents that proved how my son-in-law had used my assets as collateral without my authorization. Everything legally linked, everything proven. Every signature, every stamp, every date. This is a castle of lies," Daniel said, tapping the papers lightly, "and all we need to do is push one stone for it to all come down." I took the documents carefully, as if I were holding something sacred. They were papers, yes, but they felt as heavy as all my years of effort. "And what do we do now?" I asked. "We will file the lawsuit for restitution of property and property fraud," he replied with surgical calm. "As soon as the judge signs, a court officer will go to their house with the order." I fell silent. I thought of their faces, of the moment they would hear the words, "This property does not belong to you." "Daniel," I said in a low voice, "promise me there won't be a scene." "There will be justice," he replied, and his tone allowed no argument. "Before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories, and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me see that you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now let's continue." I spent the rest of the day in my room. I couldn't focus on anything else. The sound of Daniel's pen in his office, the distant murmur of the city, the ticking of the clock, everything seemed to be setting the stage for something inevitable. I took out my notebook, the one where I had written my thoughts since I got back on my feet, and I started writing a letter. It wasn't for the judge, nor for Daniel. It was for her, my daughter. "Daughter," I began with a trembling hand, "if you ever read this, it might already be too late to ask for forgiveness, or to understand what you did. I'm not writing from resentment, but from sadness. I never wanted your suffering, but it was necessary for you to understand what it feels like to lose what you thought was eternal. When you were a little girl, you used to tell me I was your hero, and I was, until I stopped being one in your eyes. I don't know when love turned into shame, or when you started seeing me as a burden, but I want you to know that even on the day you threw me out, my heart continued to love you just the same. Today, life will teach you what I couldn't, and when it does, it won't be to punish you, but to remind you that dignity is not inherited, it is learned." I put the paper aside and stared at the incomplete page. I couldn't write anymore. There was a lump in my throat, a mix of love and pain that couldn't find a way out. Daniel came in at that moment. He saw me with the letter in my hands and understood without asking. "Is it for her?" I nodded. "You still love her, don't you? A father never stops loving Daniel. He just learns to do it from a distance." He watched me for a few seconds and then said, "Then keep it. Give it to her when all this is over. Sometimes the truth needs silence to be heard." That night the wind beat hard against the windows. I couldn't sleep. I paced back and forth, remembering every stage of my life, every sacrifice, every mistake. I thought of Linda, of how she would have faced all of this. "With your head held high, Michael," she would have told me, "but without hate." I sat down and wrote a final sentence at the bottom of the letter. "I'm not looking for revenge, daughter. I'm looking for you to remember who I am, because the man you threw out was not a nuisance. He was your father." I folded the paper carefully and put it inside an envelope. Then I placed it in the box where I kept the dried flowers from Linda's garden, the last link to the past. The next morning, Daniel arrived with a serious but calm face. "The judge signed," he told me simply. "Tomorrow an officer will go to their house. I will be with him." I stood still, feeling my whole body tense up. It was the beginning of the end. Daniel looked at me with a mix of respect and pride. "You don't need to go, Michael. I'll take care of everything." But I shook my head. "No, Daniel. I will be there. Not as someone reclaiming something, but as someone returning to what is his." He looked into my eyes and understood. "Then prepare yourself, my friend. Tomorrow, the man they threw out of his house will return through the front door." That night I slept little, but for the first time, I slept in peace, because I knew that at dawn, the story would turn around. I had never felt time move so slowly. That morning, every minute seemed to weigh an eternity. I dressed in the only suit I had, the one Daniel had helped me tailor weeks ago. I ironed it carefully, combed my hair in front of the mirror, and took a deep breath. I wanted to look dignified, not out of vanity, but because that day represented more than just justice. It was my return to the world of the living. Daniel arrived on time, with his usual elegance. He carried a discreet black briefcase and an expression that mixed determination with respect. Behind him was a middle-aged man, dressed in a dark suit with an official folder in his hand. He had a cold, professional gaze. He was the court officer. "Ready?" Daniel asked, as if he needed to hear my voice to confirm the inevitable. "Ready," I replied. The journey to the house was silent. I looked out the car window at the same landscapes I had traveled months ago when they kicked me out. But now everything was different. I was no longer the broken man walking in the rain with an empty suitcase. I was someone else, someone who had learned that pain can also be strength. When the car stopped in front of the gate, my heart pounded violently against my chest. There it was, my house, imposing, beautiful, but soulless. Linda's tree still stood firm in the garden, its branches reaching out as if awaiting my return. The officer got out first, adjusting his tie. Daniel followed with a firm step. I stayed in the car for a few more seconds, looking at the facade. I touched the edge of the seat, closed my eyes, and murmured to myself, "Linda, I'm here." I got out slowly. The sound of my footsteps on the pavement echoed as if time had stopped. The man in the black suit knocked on the door 3 times. The echo reverberated in the neighborhood's silence. A few seconds passed before the door opened, and when it did, it was her who appeared. My daughter. She was dressed elegantly, but her face was tired. At first, she didn't recognize me. She looked at the officer, then at Daniel, and finally at me. Confusion crossed her gaze, followed by an imperceptible tremor. "Dad," she whispered, her voice a thread. I didn't answer. It wasn't the time. Behind her, her husband appeared, the same man who had thrown me out, now with an irritated expression at seeing 3 strangers at his door. "What's going on here?" he asked in a haughty tone. The officer took out a document and spoke with an icy calm. "Mr. Rodriguez, I have a court notice. This property has been legally identified as belonging to Mr. Michael Rivas, present here." He laughed. A nervous, incredulous laugh. "There must be a mistake," he said. "This house is mine." "No!" Daniel intervened with a firm voice. "This house belongs to the man you threw out months ago. The rightful owner never relinquished his rights, and everything you have done since then, the loans, the renovations, the purchases, is now under judicial review." My son-in-law's face contorted, the confidence drained from his eyes, and his skin turned pale as if the air had been knocked out of him. "This is a joke," he muttered. "It is not," Daniel said, "and I advise you not to resist. The order has already been signed." My daughter stared at me, motionless, with unshed tears. "Dad," she finally said, trembling, "what are you doing?" I took a step toward her. "I'm not doing anything, daughter. I'm just taking back what I should never have lost. My name. Before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me see that you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue." The officer entered with measured steps, followed by Daniel. I stayed on the threshold, watching. Inside, the air smelled different, no longer of home but of expensive perfume and falsehood. I walked slowly, without looking back. I touched a wall, then the railing, the window frame. Every corner brought back memories like knives. My daughter's laughter as a child, Linda's voice calling us for dinner, the echo of a life that was no longer there. "This is an outrage!" my son-in-law shouted, his voice breaking. "You can't do this to me." I looked at him for the first time, directly in the eyes. "I'm not doing anything to you, son," I said calmly. "I'm just returning the lesson you gave me, to know what it's like to be left on the street." He tried to approach, but Daniel stepped in. The officer warned him that any aggression would be reported. My daughter was crying. I wanted to hug her, but I didn't. Not yet. She had to understand. The silence became heavy. The only sound was the rustling of leaves outside. Then, with a firm voice, the officer announced, "As of today, this property is back in the possession of Mr. Rivas." There was a moment of emptiness, an eternal second in which everyone stood motionless. My son-in-law stepped back, as white as the wall. My daughter covered her mouth with her hand, and I took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, "I'm not trying to humiliate you," I said to her, slowly. "I just want you to understand what respect means." I went out to the garden and looked at the tree. The wind blew gently through the branches, as if an invisible someone were applauding. Daniel approached and put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Michael." "No," I replied. They understood. And with that, I knew that justice had spoken. Not with anger, but with truth. The silence after the impact was overwhelming. No one spoke for several seconds. You could only hear the wind filtering through the cracks in the windows, as if the house itself were holding its breath. My daughter's face was covered in tears, while my son-in-law, his jaw clenched, tried to maintain his composure. I remained standing in the middle of the living room, the same one where we once blew out her birthday candles, where she took her first steps, where I swore to protect her from the world. But this time, I was the one looking at her from the other side. The court officer spoke in a firm, almost impersonal voice. "You have 72 hours to vacate the property. Any belongings left inside after that time will be inventoried and secured under court order." My son-in-law tried to protest, but his voice broke. "This can't be legal," he said, looking at Daniel. "This is an abuse." Daniel didn't flinch. "Everything here is legal. Signatures, records, witnesses. You used properties that didn't belong to you, forged documents, and violated your family's trust. If you insist, you'll have to explain it to a judge." He took a step back, pale, defeated. For the first time, I saw him as fragile, small. He was no longer the man who screamed "useless old man" at me while tearing up my photos. He was a scared child in the body of a corrupt adult. My daughter knelt before me, her eyes red and her soul shattered. "Dad, please, don't do this. Don't leave us on the street." Her voice tore me apart inside. I didn't answer right away. I felt a lump rise in my throat. "On the street?" I finally said without raising my voice. "Those are the exact words you said to me when you kicked me out. Remember? Go die on the street, old man." She began to cry harder. I didn't know what I was doing. "He manipulated me, Dad." I was confused. "No." I interrupted her calmly. "You were comfortable. There's a big difference." Before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories, and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me see that you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue. The officer and Daniel began to review the final documents, signing reports, stamping papers, making sure everything was in order. I watched them move, but my mind was far away, among memories. I remembered my daughter's small hands when she would tell me, "I love you, Dad." The nights she would wait up for me to see if I got home safely from work. The times she would climb on my shoulders and say she wanted to see the world from where I saw it. And I thought, at what point does love turn into neglect? She was still crying. "Dad, please don't take this from us. This is our life." I slowly bent down to her level. "I'm not taking anything from you, daughter. I'm just giving you back the lesson you forgot. Life comes full circle, and when you show disrespect, time has a way of reminding you." Her husband turned to me with contained anger. "We're going to get back on our feet from this, old man. You'll regret this." Daniel took a step forward. "Watch your words. Unlike you, Mr. Rivas doesn't make threats. He delivers." The man fell silent, took his coat, looked around like a cornered animal, and left, slamming the door. My daughter was left alone in front of me, on her knees. I helped her up. For a moment our eyes met, and in them I saw the little girl I once picked up from school, the one who slept hugging her teddy bear. "I don't hate you, daughter," I said with a broken voice, "but I had to do this." She nodded slowly, as if she finally understood. The officer closed his folder. "All set, Mr. Rivas." Daniel came to me, putting a hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Michael." I nodded in silence. When we left, the sky was gray. A light drizzle began to fall. I stopped for a moment in front of the gate and saw my daughter close the door behind us. I knew her time there was short, but I also knew she needed it to learn. As we walked to the car, Daniel glanced at me. "Are you satisfied?" he asked. It took me a few seconds to answer. I don't know if satisfied is the word, but I am at peace. We got in the car. As it started, I looked one last time at the garden. The tree was still there, firm, beautiful in the rain. It seemed like the branches were moving as if saying goodbye. Linda always said that trees listen, that they hold the voices of the past. Maybe that tree knew that, in the end, justice had blossomed. When we got to the office, Daniel said goodbye with a hug. Rest, old friend. You've closed a chapter. I smiled, but my eyes filled with tears. Because yes, I had closed a chapter. But when you lose your daughter, even when justice is on your side, the soul doesn't celebrate, it just breathes. That night, in my room, I opened the envelope with the letter I had written to her. I didn't deliver it, not yet. I put it away again, with a new sentence written at the end. Perhaps one day, when you understand what you did, this letter will bring back the memory of the love you lost. Until then, I will watch over you in silence. I turned off the light. I sat by the window and listened to the rain. It was the same rain that fell the day they kicked me out, but this time it didn't hurt. It was different, because this time the rain wasn't washing away the pain. It was forgiving it. 3 weeks after that day, the phone rang at dawn. I didn't usually get calls at that hour. The sound woke me up with a jolt, as if someone had shaken my soul. I picked up the receiver with a mix of fatigue and premonition. "Hello," I said, my voice still hoarse. There were a few seconds of silence, then a trembling, almost broken voice. "Dad, it's me." I recognized her tone immediately. The world seemed to stop. There was no anger, no reproaches, no pride. Just that one word, Dad, which I hadn't heard with sincerity for so long. "What's wrong, daughter?" I asked, holding back my emotion. She took a deep breath on the other end of the line. "I don't know where to start. Everything fell apart, Dad." Her voice broke. "He left. He sold the car, took the money from the accounts, and disappeared. He left me with the debts, with everything he ruined. I have nothing, no house, no job, no strength." I closed my eyes. It wasn't a surprise, but hearing it from her own mouth hurt me. "I warned you that pride has a price," I said without harshness, "and that the foundations of deceit always crumble." She started to cry. "I know, Dad. I know. You were right, and now I don't know what to do." I listened to her sob on the other end, and each of her tears pierced my soul. For a few seconds the silence was absolute. Then I said, "Tell me where you are." "At a friend's house." "I didn't want to bother you, but I have no one else to call." "You're not bothering me, daughter. You never could." I hung up the phone and stared into the emptiness of the room. The dawn light was coming through the window, painting everything in a golden hue. After so many years, that light didn't seem cold to me. It was warm. It was human. Before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories, and if you're enjoying this story, it helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue. When I arrived at the place she told me, I saw her sitting on a park bench with a worn-out coat and a lost look in her eyes. She was no longer the arrogant woman who had slammed the door in my face. She was a wounded daughter, disarmed by life. When she saw me, she stood up slowly. "Dad," she murmured, "I don't even know how to look at you." I walked towards her and placed a hand on her face. "Look at me like you did when you were a child," I said. Nothing else. Her eyes filled with tears. We hugged. It was an awkward, trembling, but real hug. I felt her body surrender in my arms, as if she was finally letting go of the weight of the years, the pride, the lie. "Forgive me," she whispered. "You are already forgiven, daughter," I replied, "since the very day you threw me out." We sat in silence. There wasn't much to say. Sometimes forgiveness isn't built with words, but with presence. I offered for her to stay with me for a while. She hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden, Dad." I smiled. "You were never a burden. You just got a little lost." Over the following weeks, we shared a routine. She helped me with the shopping, we cooked together, and at night we talked about simple things. The sea, the weather, Linda. One night, without warning, she asked me, "Do you miss her?" "Every day," I replied. "But sometimes I think she never really left." "Why?" "Because every time I see love conquer resentment, I feel she's still here." She fell silent, her eyes filled with tears. "Do you think she would have forgiven me?" she finally asked. "Linda didn't know how to hate, daughter. She only knew how to love. And in that, you're a lot like her, even if you don't know it yet." That night, when I went to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It wasn't the peace of triumph, but that of a soul that finally stops fighting. I had gotten my daughter back. Not her obedience or her admiration, but something purer, her humanity. Weeks later, while we were having breakfast, she told me, "I've decided to look for a job, Dad. I don't want you to support me." I smiled with pride. "That makes me happy. Not because I want you to leave, but because you're finally becoming yourself again." I looked out the window. Linda's tree was visible in the distance, strong, alive. The leaves moved gently, and I swear that for a moment I heard her voice in the wind. "It's done, Michael. It's done." And I understood that sometimes life doesn't give you back what you lost, but it gives you something better, the chance to heal. The human soul is a chest full of echoes. You think you've closed certain chapters, but all it takes is a word, a look, a sigh, for the past to open up again. My daughter had been with me for several weeks. Her presence had brought some warmth back to the house, and although the wound was still there, the air felt different, lighter, more human. One night, while we were having dinner, I noticed she was distracted. She didn't touch her food, just played with her fork, lost in thought. "Is something wrong?" I asked. It took her a moment to answer. "Dad, I need to tell you something." I looked at her without saying a word. "It's about Mom," she finally said, lowering her voice. I felt my heart skip a beat. "What about your mother?" I asked carefully. "A few days ago, while I was organizing my things, I found an old box that had her letters in it, and one was addressed to you. She never gave it to you." She got up, went to her purse, and took out a yellowish envelope. She handed it to me with trembling hands. "For Michael, if you ever read this, it means I no longer had the courage to tell you in person." I recognized her handwriting. Linda. My eyes blurred before I even read a word. I broke the seal slowly, as if I was afraid the paper would crumble in my fingers. "Michael, my love, I never knew how to tell you this without destroying what we built. But I need you to know the truth. The day our daughter got married, I already knew what was going on between him and her. I found out by accident, and I thought I could stop it, but I didn't have the courage. I was afraid of ruining her life. I was afraid of breaking the family. I blamed myself every day for keeping silent. If one day everything comes to light, I want you to forgive me. I wasn't an accomplice, just a coward. I loved you both, although in different ways. And that misunderstood love was my punishment." I was speechless. The silence was total. The words burned into my mind one by one, like knives. She knew, Linda knew, and she kept quiet. My daughter was watching me with tears in her eyes. "Dad, I had no idea. I can't believe, Mom." I didn't let her continue. I raised my hand, asking for silence. It wasn't the time to blame anyone. It was time to understand. "Your mother kept quiet to protect you," I said slowly, and that silence killed her inside. "To protect me?" she asked incredulously. "Yes," I answered in a grave voice, "because sometimes love doesn't know how to express itself with justice. She chose to carry the pain rather than see it explode in front of you." My daughter covered her face with her hands. "Oh my God, Dad, all this time I judged her wrong." "We all did," I whispered, "even me." Before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue. I carefully put the letter away. I folded it and placed it inside my notebook next to the letter I had written to my daughter, two truths that finally met. Then, I stared at the flame of the candle on the table. The fire danced slowly, as if it were breathing with me. "Daughter," I finally said, "I want you to understand something. The truth doesn't always heal, but it always sets you free." She nodded, crying. "And you? Do you forgive her?" she asked. "I already did years ago, without knowing it, because I never stopped loving her." We sat in silence. Outside, the wind blew, moving the branches of Linda's tree. It was as if she herself were there, listening to us, finally at rest. My daughter got up, walked around the table, and hugged me from behind. "Thank you for not hating her," she said in a low voice. "To hate someone who gave you love, even if they made a mistake, is to hate yourself," I replied. We spent the rest of the night talking about Linda. We remembered her laugh, the way she sang while cooking, her habit of leaving fresh flowers in every corner. And we understood that love doesn't die with bodies, but stays alive in gestures, in silences, in the forgiveness that takes a long time to arrive. That night, when my daughter went to sleep, I stayed alone in the living room, looking at the letter. I read it again one more time, not with anger, but with tenderness, and as the dawn began to paint the sky, I murmured in a low voice. There are no more secrets, Linda. The three of you can rest now. You, her, and me. That morning I woke before dawn. The sky was still a bluish shadow, and the city slept under a silence that felt as heavy as a secret. I got up slowly, made coffee, and sat by the window, just as Linda used to do whenever she couldn't sleep. For the first time in many years, the aroma of coffee didn't taste like loneliness. There was something new in it, something warm, something like peace. Outside, the branches of the tree moved slowly, and I could have sworn that one of them brushed against the glass, as if greeting me. "It's done, Michael." I heard in my mind the same soft voice of Linda, the one that accompanied me even on the darkest days. My daughter was still sleeping in the back room. She had been trying to rebuild her life for weeks. She worked part-time at a bookstore downtown, and every afternoon she came back with tired eyes, but with the smile of someone starting over. She had regained something money can't buy: dignity. There was no more luxury, no expensive suits, no fancy dinners. Just a woman learning to ask for forgiveness and to forgive herself, who finally understood that humility is not defeat, but redemption. And seeing her like that, so human, restored some of my faith in life, that sometimes pain has a purpose that is only revealed when everything has passed. I opened my notebook and took out the letter I had kept for months, the one I wrote the night before I got the house back. I unfolded it carefully. The letters were a bit blurred from the tears I had shed then, but they were still legible, firm. I reread it in silence and decided to add something more. I wrote slowly, in large letters, trying to put into those last lines everything my heart had learned after so much. Daughter, life is not measured by what you have, but by what you give. There was a time when I thought forgiveness was a form of surrender, but now I know it is the only path to freedom. I don't want you to live the rest of your days feeling guilty. What's past cannot be changed, but what is to come can still be built. Don't try to fix what is broken, daughter. Learn to take care of what remains standing. I put the notebook inside an envelope, with her name written on the front. I didn't know when I would give it to her. Maybe one day when life asked me to. Maybe never. It didn't matter. The essential was already said, even if she hadn't read it yet. Before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to William's Revenge Stories, and if you're enjoying this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue. I watched the light slowly begin to filter through the window. The house, my house, was alive again. Not because of the walls or the furniture, but because there was laughter, conversations, soft music, the smell of toast and coffee. Life had returned, and it had done so in a simpler, truer way. Daniel would come to visit us from time to time. He always brought a bottle of wine and a tired smile. He told me that my story had reminded him why he became a lawyer, to defend people who still believed in justice, even if the world laughed at them. That afternoon, my daughter and I went for a walk in the park. The sun was setting at an angle on the trees, painting the leaves gold. She took my arm, just like when she was little, and we walked without hurry. She told me about her job, the books she was reading, her desire to study again, and as I listened to her, I understood that life always finds a way to get back on the right track, even if it's late, even if it hurts. I stopped for a moment, looked at her, and said, "Do you know what I've learned, daughter?" "What, Dad?" "That when you plant love, even if it gets trampled on, it always blooms again." She smiled with tears in her eyes and squeezed my hand. In that instant, I felt the entire weight of the years, of betrayal, of loneliness, dissolve. Linda was right. Love is not destroyed. It only transforms. That night, while my daughter was sleeping, I sat again by the tree in the garden. I had a small candle and a photo of Linda with me. I placed it at the foot of the trunk and lit it. The flame flickered with the wind, but it didn't go out. I watched it for a long time, until my eyes became moist. "We did it, my love," I whispered, not with anger, but with truth. "And although it hurt to lose so much, in the end, the only thing I have left is the best of us." The sky filled with stars, and for the first time in a long time, I felt my heart rest. There were no victories or defeats, just a life that, despite everything, still had meaning. I closed my eyes and listened to the whisper of the leaves, the distant song of a cricket, the sound of the wind passing through the branches. It was as if the entire universe was breathing with me. When I went back into the house, I saw my daughter asleep on the sofa with a book open on her chest. I approached slowly, carefully took the book, and placed a blanket over her shoulders. On her face, there was no longer any trace of pride or sadness, only peace. I looked at her with tenderness, and thought about everything we had survived. I realized then that life had not given me back what I lost. It had given me something new, more fragile, but also purer. We had learned that family is not defined by blood or by last names, but by the ability to forgive one another. I went up the stairs, stopped for a moment in front of Linda's photo in the hallway, and without a word, I smiled. She was still there, in every corner, in every gesture. I didn't need any more signs. Love, when it's true, never leaves, it just changes form. I turned off the lights, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Rest, my love. Everything is in its place now." And for the first time in many years, I slept without nightmares.